Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. We are going military today. I have Christian Ruff of Uncommon Elite. They are recruiters, and he was on the 160th, which is a helicopter team that works with special forces, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, etc. I mean, they have a mantra: we will be at a location within 30 seconds of when we're supposed to be there. And this guy is now taking that military discipline, the elite special forces discipline, blending it with business strategy to help businesses find, often, if not always, an ex-military specialist, ex-Green Beret, ex-Navy SEAL, who can come in with the discipline and really take a company to the next level. We had a great conversation. I know you're going to love it. A lot of valuable tips for you. Let's dive in. Christian, I am excited to have you on the show. You are a former Navy SEAL, and now you are taking your special operations experience, bringing that into the business world and doing some amazing things with your elite team, Uncommon Elite. But I am curious, if you look back on all the lessons you learned out there flying a helicopter for the Navy SEALs, what was the moment that you had what you might feel is your greatest lesson from that time in your life?
Good question. So one thing I'll just clarify off the bat. So I flew for an organization called the 160th. And so they're commonly referred to as the Night Stalkers. So think May of 2011, going after a particular terrorist, or if you've seen Black Hawk Down, or if you go and look up the Baghdadi raid a couple of years ago. They're the helicopter organization that supports SEAL teams, other Tier 1 special operators. And so I was not a Navy SEAL. I flew aircraft in support of them.
Okay.
So I just want to...
Pretty close, though. Pretty close. I mean, in all...
Yeah, I mean, they have a very, their assessment process as part of the special operations community. They have a similar assessment process, although most guys become pilots because they don't want to... They don't want to walk or they don't want to swim. They just want to fly places instead. But to answer your question, there's an operation we were on. We were supporting another Tier 1 unit, so someone else other than the SEAL teams. And we were going after, the target was a ISIS guy. And so it was in the eastern side of Syria. This was April of 2018. And so the aircraft that I flew, if you consider a Black Hawk helicopter and an Apache helicopter, and you put the two of them together, you kind of get this Frankenstein version that's a Black Hawk with a whole lot of armament on it.
What's the difference for a layman like myself and the audience?
Yeah. The difference between an Apache and a Black Hawk?
Yeah.
So Apache is a 2-pilot aircraft, just pilots. There's no crew. It's narrower, and it's a gunship. So it has rockets, Hellfires, a 30 millimeter cannon, and it was designed in the Cold War to be anti-tank aircraft. So the thought was, we can take these aircraft, you can put them in Germany, and then they can just blast tanks if the tanks are coming across to the other part of Europe. The Black Hawk, on the other hand, was the replacement for the Huey. So the Huey was the famous helicopter used in Vietnam. Military said we need something to carry more weight and go further, so they came up with the Black Hawk. So you have a gunship and you have a troop carrier. Well, because of the nature of what the 160th does and the 2 Tier 1 units that it supports, we sometimes have to go do different things. And those different things require, you got to be able to fly longer. You got to be able to pack the aircraft in the back of the C-17 and disappear in the middle of the night. And so they saw a need for, let's take this Black Hawk that can carry troops, but now let's just put a whole bunch of guns on it and more ammo. And so it can fly longer, it can shoot more things, carry more ammo, and in a pinch, you can go and land and pick people up in case it's an emergency. So that's like very high level what the difference is. There are only a handful of this particular type of aircraft in the world, and they reside out of that organization. So that's like, to give you some idea of what we did, it was very up close, personal. We'd get very close to a target. There wasn't like this whole like standoff where you're a mile away and shooting. You're flying up to 200 meters from the target and then violently turning around only to come back and fly back again. So it's a very aggressive type of flying that, frankly, not really anybody else in the military does.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened that on this particular mission?
Like everything in business, you have a plan and nothing goes to plan. So
it was coming, right?
Yeah. It's like, okay, we have this great thing. We have this product we're going to launch or this service line or we're going to implement this new tech stack and we're going to be done in a month. And we all know that the second you start, like plan goes out the window. And so for that evening, the second we took off, the whole plan essentially went out the window. The idea was that the operators that we were supporting, they were going to get in the back of a Chinook, which is one of those giant helicopters with the 2 rotor systems. They're going to get back to the Chinook. They're going to climb up to like 10,000 feet, and then they're going to jump out. And they're going to jump out, and they're going to parachute to, let's call 15 kilometers away from the target, and they're going to walk to the target. And they're going to walk to the target so they're not seen. This is all happening at night. Well, they go to jump out, and one of the individuals that jumps out, his main parachute doesn't deploy. So he's already starting to drift away from everybody else because everybody else is parachute deployed. And it takes him longer to open his reserve. So he finally opens his reserve, and at that point, he's already drifted so much from the extra time that he's fallen that he's now completely separated from the team. Finds himself in the middle of desert, surrounded, with this good amount of distance, all these villages, but he's out there by himself, like with nobody else in the middle of the night in Syria. And so the whole plan at that moment changes. We pick up from where we are, we flex over, we grab one of the Chinooks, we go pick them up. And so now we're sort of behind timeline, our fuel numbers have adjusted, our route has changed. But meanwhile, the guys are still walking over to this target. So they're walking over the target. We kind of figure our stuff out, make whatever adjustments we need. And the idea of what we mostly do is when a ground operator is going up to a target, they need somebody very close overhead who's going to swoop in and be there either first line of offense or first line of defense. And so this particular evening, what we had negotiated or what they had asked from us is they're going to go get outside this building and they're going to position themselves a couple hundred meters away, still close, but enough distance. And we were going to come in and we're going to come to about like 300. We're going to get pretty low. We're going to pitch up and then we're going to dive down towards the target and start engaging with the target to let the people in the house know we're there and maybe subdue what actions they may want to take. So very much like getting in front of the action, we call it pre-assault fires. And so we start knocking on the front door with a bunch of ammunition. And we were actually doing it in conjunction with an AC-130. So we're knocking on the building. We coming down, diving 200 meters, turning away. AC-130, as soon as they see us break clear of the building, they start hitting the building. We come wrap around. When we're calling inbound, the AC-130 stops, and we're just doing this volley. And then that's where things got even spicier. So what you'd hope for is at that point, they're just like, all right, like, we're done. We give up. Like, we understand you're here. And that's not what happened at all. And so without going into too many details, it turned into more of an event. You had a lot of individuals moving in a lot of different directions. You had the ground forces getting closer to the home. A lot of people trying to go hide in things or hide under things. They forget that, or didn't know we have night vision. So they think they're hiding, but not actually. If I think back to it, why it was such a profound experience, I was still a junior guy at that point. And I'd been on some operations before where things were different, but they largely went to plan. And this was just totally new for me. But there was coming out of that, because I experienced that, because I was able to navigate the complexity and what could be referred to as chaos, it gave me a level of confidence that previously in my life I'd never had, of like, okay, here's a really complex situation where we have a base plan, we have communications, we have intent, everything's done. Nothing's like the plan that we came up with no longer exists. How are you going to keep the team aligned to still accomplish an objective? And what I have found in business, now having my own business and having run other people's businesses, is like, yeah, that's entrepreneurship. That's it. Like, what is it you need to accomplish? Why are we doing it? What are the left and right limits? And just knowing that if you have the right people, you have the right culture, accountability, expectations, you can just go figure everything else out without having to follow a script along the way. So
now, how are you wired, Christian? Are you like a methodical, detail-oriented, analytical, step-by-step guy, or are you like a high sense of urgency, ID, type A? I got to force myself to do the details guy.
Force myself to do the details. And I used to be better at it, because in that environment, when we're going and planning an operation, I mean, we'll spend weeks planning an operation just to go fly 8 hours to do it. I mean, to the, like, I need this many pounds of fuel, not rounded, but like I need 3,861 pounds of fuel to accomplish this. Not like I need 4,000 or I need this many rounds of ammo. Very, very detail oriented on everything. And that worked for them because it was a necessity. But yeah, I mean, I'm very much of what is the 20% of information I need to know to get started, and then everything else to just figure out.
Now, you mentioned when we were getting together kind of as a warm-up conversation to this a week or so ago, that you were trained that you have to be at a location within 30 seconds. And does that come naturally to you? And so in the way you're wired? Let me reword that. Is time a detail you're very focused on, whereas other details you have to force yourself a little bit more?
I would say time. So in our training, so the motto is anywhere in the world plus or minus 30 seconds. And what every SEAL team, Ranger, Green Beret, other tier 1 units, what they know from our organization, the 160th, is that we're always going to be there on time and we will go anywhere. So normal conventional aviation units typically, well, they don't have the training, nor do they necessarily have the will to accept the type of risk that we do. And so we become known as like, all right, anywhere in the world, plus or minus 30 seconds. And so our training is based around, okay, the result is anywhere in the world, plus or minus 30 seconds. But the intent behind it is we say we're going to do something, so we're going to go do it. If I say, I'm going to put you into this courtyard, I'm going to put you into this courtyard. If I say, we're going to pick you up at this time in this location, we're going to pick you up at this time and location. And the other motto is Night Stalkers don't quit. And we never have to like tell that to each other, but it's the underlying mantra and guiding principle. So if you think of like core values of an organization, like that's the one. And so now for me, showing up on time to a Zoom or showing up on time for really any social engagement, and my wife has different views on this, it's not necessarily about like, I need to absolutely be on time, but I said I was going to be there.
Yeah.
So level of commitment.
In this situation that you described with the 160th, I mean, the schedule was out the window and you had to make adjustments and there were lives on the line. So there's an added pressure because there are life and death on the line. Mm-hmm. But now that you're shifting over to business, one of the biggest problems I've experienced with my clients is how they don't feel a pressure with time. They feel more of a pressure of waiting till the time's right, or I'm not ready to do that. And so how does the pressure on time affect your judgment in a business environment versus what it used to be on the 160th?
That's good. I would say for me, I thought it could be, if you look at any organization has like key tasks that they perform. They have things that They must do, and they must do right. There's a lot of things that you want to do right, but there's only a few things that are non-negotiable. There are only a few things in any organization that, in order to achieve your vision or achieve your purpose, like, you absolutely cannot mess these up. Otherwise, you're letting down yourself, you're letting down your customers, you're letting down quality service, so on and so forth. Our non-negotiable was, we're going to be there plus or minus 30 seconds. And if we're late, we're going to communicate it, and then we'll be at that time at plus or minus 30 seconds. So when I think about how do I now, in business, if time isn't the pressure, like, what really translates? And what translates is, if time's no longer the non-negotiable, what is? And for me, it's operating with urgency. So if I have a lead that comes in, I'm not waiting until the next day. Like, I'm going to try to respond to them like within 60 seconds. If a client has an issue and they reach out about it, I'm not going to say, hey, let's schedule a time tomorrow. Look, I'm going to finish getting my daughter down for bed, and I'm going to call them afterwards. And so I would say that the pressure of time has not carried on, other than just like, I hate being late to Zoom calls. I would say it's more of like, in my business, like, what are my non-negotiables, and how do I follow them as I build my team? How do I get my team to buy into them? And how does that become a part of the culture, where in my last life, we would literally, if you're getting a briefing, you would count down the last 10 seconds. If the meeting was at 12 o'clock, at 11:59 and 50 seconds, you would look at your watch and you would count down 10, 9, 8, all the way down to briefing start. And everybody would pull out their watch and watch you, just so they could pick on you if you messed it up.
So you bring up non-negotiables. Non-negotiables. So, and those can vary per business, per client, per individual.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But for you, when you think of non-negotiables, applying your life experience, both the military prior to that, and then now in business and in personal life, as you're growing and maturing, what are the core non-negotiables that you work with your clients on?
Attributes over experience.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. It'll take me some time to put all this together, but all of them together. But the first one is when a company reaches out to me and they say, hey, I need a new general manager. I don't really care about what the experience they're looking for, because most of the guys that I'm placing, like, if they can figure out how to be a sniper team leader on SEAL Team 6 for 20 years, I'm pretty sure they can figure out solar, like the basics of a solar business. But what I am interested is, in that role, in that key leadership role, what are the attributes that are going to make that person successful? And so when I'm working with the client, sure, I'll ask, like, what experience helps, but above all, like, what are the attributes you need? Because I will go source based off attributes, not off of experience. You can teach a monkey to fly, but you can't teach someone to have tenacity, urgency, integrity, attitude, aptitude. So in my role, that's like first and foremost. And some people have a hard time grasping that. They just end up not being someone that we work with, frankly.
Yeah, and it strikes me that you bring up this, just to use the solar business as an example, that if I hire someone who's done solar for 20 years, I'm going to get someone who has a certain way to do it. And that may not advance your client's team to a championship win. That may just going to be another company that's doing solar. Whereas I would assume your companies, people who are hiring uncommon elite, want something that's uncommon and elite, which is, so it's going to be different.
Yeah. So there's a part of that where, all right, we're going to go attributes over experience, but maybe the guy needs to learn the industry. Like I'm doing a role for HVAC right now, and the guys that we're pulling from, they don't have HVAC experience. So in working with the owner, it's, I'm going to go find you guys that can absolutely crush it. And I'm going to find you guys that can learn, but what's your plan to onboard them? Like, I'll find you the best people in the world. What's your plan to get them to the point where they're going to be successful? Because it's like, my first job was running urgent cares. I was flying helicopters, and then I was running urgent cares in COVID. I didn't know anything about urgent cares. I didn't know anything about medical billing or CPT codes or the difference between a medical assistant and a nurse versus a nurse practitioner or any of that. But I had a employer who put me on a set path to like, here's how you're going to go learn this thing so I can best leverage your attributes in this environment. So it's two sides to everything. So what I will stress is like, I'm going to go find you people, but like give them the best onboarding experience in the world, because that's going to get you further. That's going to get you further ahead.
And so you gave us an example of how you have dealt with this, where it was aptitude. Do you have a client example where you found somebody for a client that didn't have the industry experience, but came in and because of certain attributes of that individual or their aptitude, they nailed it and really brought that company to the next level?
The solar one. The solar one's a real one.
Okay.
First placement we did about 1.5 years ago, company reached out to me. They just acquired a business. They needed a president, $25 million revenue business, and they needed somebody who can come in. It was essentially a turnaround. Like there were some issues. So they came up to me and said, hey, can you find me a guy? And I was like, I can find you a guy. And so I found a gentleman named Mike Merlino, was in the SEAL teams for 20 years, spent most of that time on SEAL Team 6, was a sniper team leader, went and got an MBA from MIT. And his very first job, the day he finished MIT, was running a $25 million a year solar business. And it's been 18 months and crushed it. Increased sales, increased culture, I say increased culture, improved culture by having a more predictable hiring and training and retention process. Really leaned out the team for what was actually needed. There was a lot of unnecessary overhead from the acquisition. So he made those changes, and 18 months later, it's a completely different company.
Wow. Well, let's keep going on your core attributes here. So we did aptitude. What's another one?
Tenacity.
Okay. And how would you define that?
That's a good question. I would define it such as, I'll use an example. Imagine you have a brick wall and you need to get to the other side of the brick wall. I think persistence is, I'm just going to keep pushing up against this wall until it falls down. Like, I'm not going to quit. I'm just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And so we put a lot of value on, hey, I'm quitting. Here's the way. I'm going to keep at this way. I'm going to keep going and nothing's going to stop me ever. I'm going to keep pushing against this wall. Well, persistence doesn't always work. But tenacity is me saying like, all right, I got this wall, but there's also a window to the next to it. And maybe jumping out the window isn't the way, but I'm going to figure out a way to get out of this window, down, and then just around to the other side of the wall without trying some technique or some approach over and over and over again, because I want to be persistent about it. So I would say the tenacity is more oriented around, like, I've got the objective. There are many ways to get there. I'm not going to maybe choose the most obvious one. I'm just going to do whatever it takes with a high degree of urgency and violence of action to go get there and go get what I want.
So Christian, I'm sitting here with a huge smile on my face, and I got to tell the audience, this is only the second time we've talked. First time we talked was maybe 8 minutes or 10 minutes. But you have just described what I teach my clients is the difference between persistence and tenacity based on my mistakes for decades, in that I knew how to work hard. Hard is persistent. Yeah. Man, I'm going to keep ramming this wall until I get through this stinking wall. And I use a brick wall as my example. And tenacity is working smart, where I'm going to look around. Well, can I go to the left side? Can I go to the right side? Can I go over? Can I go under this wall? I'm going to work smart to get through the wall. And that's the difference. That's why we really need in this country to teach critical thinking. So our people know how to behave tenaciously. And so that is an amazing coincidence. So congratulations. I've never had anybody give that as an example. So that's all. Of course, I'm totally biased, but
yeah, I like it. Great. If you look at the assessment process to get into 160th or really any special operations organization, they're all different. So the SEALs, they go hang out in the water for a bunch. Green Berets, they do a whole lot of land navigation and team exercises. CAG does another thing. It's long. It's all in the woods. You're walking around the woods for a long ass time. 160th, it's pretty short. It's about a week long. Some of it involves flying. Most of it doesn't involve flying. But what they're looking for is, we're going to give you an objective. We're going to give you minimal information, come up with like how you plan to get there, and then show us how you're going to get there. And along the way, we're going to poke holes in every single part of it. We're not going to tell you that you're doing a bad job. We're just going to tell you that you didn't meet the expectation, and then we're going to be quiet about it. And they want to see, how do you operate when you're given an objective, you have minimal information, and then things don't go well.
Yeah.
Are you going to shut down? Are you going to get quiet? Are you going to leverage the people around you? Are you going to leverage the resources around you? And are you going to think critically about, all right, so the dude jumped out of the helicopter and his parachute took off, and now he's in the middle of the desert. Well, we still have to go to the target. So what are we going to do, and how does it affect everything else down the line?
Yeah, no, I love it. So let's keep going with your attributes. So we've got aptitude and we've got tenacity. What other core ones would you say?
Integrity. Integrity is I don't want to say it's a throwaway. It's just like, you got to have it. The only times that I've seen individuals removed from at least the organization that I was in was integrity. I only saw it happen once, and yeah, it was a integrity, definitely a violation, and it actually wasn't really involved with work. It was outside of work, but when we saw it, we're like, well, if he's doing it there, is he going to do it here? So he was swiftly shown the door. I would say attitude's a huge one. When we were looking at somebody coming into the organization, question that we would sort of ask ourselves is, would I sit in a trailer in the desert with this guy for 90 days, never seeing the sunlight, and will I lose my mind? Like, is he a guy that you want to have a beer with? And is he a guy that when things get real miserable, because they can tend to get really, really miserable, how's he going to act? Is he going to complain? Is he going to whine? Or is he just going to be like, okay, yeah, okay, this is... I've seen a lot. I've seen, septic lines on Christmas Day, overrun and flow into our tent. I've seen our compounds get blown up, and all of a sudden, like, food and supply lines are cut off, and we don't know when we're going home, and no one's giving us information, or they say you're going on Monday, and then Monday rolls around, and all of a sudden it's another 3 weeks. Like, how do they act? How's their attitude? They hold together and move on, or are they complaining? Are they toxic, or are they not fun to be around? Like, would you avoid having a beer with them?
Yeah, okay. Anything else you want to add to that core list?
Yeah, I think when we were hinting at the letters, just like, how do you blend urgency and attention to detail?
Yeah, that's a huge one.
Yeah, how do you blend it? How do you know when one is more important than the other? How do you know when I have the critical information I need? How do you stop yourself from trying to arrive at 100% of the solution and just go figure out 80% and then go?
And with all the people that you've worked with, when you get into that type of analysis, balancing the urgency with the attention to detail, is it always based on the data, or have you found any exceptional leaders who also blend in their faith in there, where they have to sometimes feel like, I got to wait on whatever they have, however they have defined God or a higher power, I got to wait on this to see if I get some guidance there, whether it's for an hour, whether it's for a day, or is it always based on data?
Usually based off data and assumptions on risk.
Okay.
Yeah, usually based off of data of, hey, what is the intelligence? What do we know? Like, what do we objectively know, and is that enough? And then in the instances where there isn't the objective data, it becomes, what am I willing to risk? Like, what level of risk am I willing to accept? And sometimes it's, I'm willing to accept a lot of risk, and sometimes it's, I'm not willing to accept any. I mean, we had a operation where, same thing, going after another individual. It was in what we believed was to be a contested area. The benefit of going and doing it made sense, but the risk was huge. The perceived risk of being attacked or enemy threat in that area that would then come into that territory was perceived to be huge, but the objective and the results of meeting that objective outweighed it. So in the absence of data, it was, all right, what is the appropriate level of risks that I'm willing to assume, and how does it balance against the net gain?
And when you talk about risk, you talk about what do we know? And when you talk about risk, is there a synonym for that where it's like, well, what do we not know, or what may we not know that's an additional risk? This is what we know, and here's these risks. But is there also part of the conversation that happens of, okay, what are the things that we may not know that may be there?
Yeah, so that's usually associated with enemy threat. I mean, it usually comes down to what is the enemy capable of, and if they're capable of it, what is the likelihood that they will do it? Okay. The other is the environment, weather. Weather's huge when you're flying. And so you could get a forecast, but, we all know that, oh yeah, it's going to be sunny today, and then it's snowing, right? Like it happens, right? It just happens. It's like, oh, perfect day. Or there's a 40% chance of rain, and all of a sudden it's like monsoons. So you take that forecast, and the forecast is basically is telling you what is the likelihood that something is going to occur, but we know it's not perfect. And so you make a decision based off of an assumption, but with any risk, you have contingency plans. So, for example, flying back this is before I went over to the special operations world, we were in Poland. This is right when Russia went into Crimea. I'm butchering that pronunciation. This is like 2013. Russia started pissing off everybody in Europe. They started pushing up against Ukraine, Crimea. And so they pushed, I had 5 aircraft at the time, and they pushed us up to Poland to basically be a show force, if you will. And we flew around Eastern Europe for a couple months, and it was fantastic. But we're flying back, and the weather reporting there is pretty limited, or at least what we had. And like, yeah, no, there's a slight chance of clouds. I'm like, okay, there's always a slight chance of clouds, like whatever, let's go. And so we take off. It's a couple Apache helicopters and our Blackhawks, and we're flying. We know some clouds. We're flying, know some clouds. We're like, okay, we'll fly above the clouds. Well, before you know it, we're in the clouds. And when you're in the clouds as a flight of helicopters, that's not a good thing because you can't see anything. And so there's the risk of like, I'm going to crash into the guy in front of me, or the guy in back of me is going to crash, or I'm going to get myself into an unusual attitude where I may like crash into the ground. But what we do, because the environment is a risk, we have the contingency of, all right, if we get into an environment where all of a sudden we're inadvertently in the clouds and we can't see anything, the lead helicopter is not going to do anything. The helicopter right behind him is going to turn 20 degrees to the right and climb 200 feet. The helicopter behind that guy is going to turn 20 degrees to the left and climb 400 feet. And so aircraft start making adjustments and climbing at various intervals to mitigate the chance that we're going to crash into each other. And so there's risk that you can accept. And with certain degrees of it, the way that we would approach it is, okay, I'm going to take this risk. but here's my contingency if this happens. Here's my contingency if that happens. And so at any given point in any operation, the environment gets a vote, enemy gets a vote. So we have a baseline plan that we know and we can just execute on without having to think about it. And so a lot of our risk mitigation came down to our training heavily involved contingencies, first level contingencies, second level contingencies, third level contingencies, and when to execute them and and when you execute them, you don't have to think about it.
And how often are those reviewed?
Daily.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that you do recruiting at Uncommon Elite. That's a big thing of what you do. But I also know that you talk about blending elite military precision with business strategy. So how much strategy work and or coaching do you do with clients?
I don't necessarily do a lot on the strategy side. It's definitely not my expertise. I would say mine is more on the tactical side of, I work with a lot of younger entrepreneurs and first-time business buyers. I'd say probably 70% of my coaching base are guys who've just got out, they've done an MBA program or they're working in private equity or investment banking, and now they want to go buy a business. And so maybe they have like the M&A part figured out, how to deal source and all that sort of thing, but they've never really led a team before. Yeah. So most of my coaching in that regard comes down to really like the day-to-day of, all right, like fundamentals of leadership, fundamentals of management, setting expectations. But then also, right, you've done all of that. How are you developing your own leaders so that you're really not the only leader? You're not the only effective leader in your organization. Yeah. So that's where more of it is. The strategy side, I think there are probably people who have a higher degree of business acumen that are better than that than I. But I would say, I think a lot of your strategy has to be nested in, execution's everything. Strategy is ideation. And I think to arrive at a strong strategy that everybody's going to buy into, you got to consider what is the type of organization you want to be first.
It's interesting. It strikes me though, with these contingency plans and, you think of pilots, you think of surgeons, at least I do. And I think of, there's a checklist before you take off, or there's a checklist before you start the operation. Yeah. But there's also training and there's best practices that have been defined. Okay, if this goes sideways, like you mentioned in the clouds, then we're prepared and we don't have to freak out. We're like, okay, we move to plan B, here's what we do, and then we figure it out from there. When you work with these different leaders, how often do you find that they have solid contingency plan? Doesn't mean they got to have 100 of them, but there's probably some common things, whether it's the solar business or it's something else where things are going to go wrong. And they're bringing, like you said, your military precision, not the bureaucracy, not the negatives, but the precision to hey, please. We're going to save time. We're going to, make it less stressful. We're going to do better work if we're prepared when something goes left.
So I think I'll answer that somewhat indirectly. I see a lot of that, but what I see a lot of is they don't have a standard way of doing business to begin with. The only reason that we could go exercise those contingencies is we had a standard way of doing business. Down to like, if we were blowing out on operations, get a text in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden you're packing the aircraft to go to whatever, name a third world country. We had a very specific way of packing a printer. Like there's a specific way to put a Blackhawk in the back of a C-17. There's a specific way to load that Blackhawk. There's also a specific way to pack a printer so that you have a printer. So everything that we did more than 3 times had a standard operating procedure, a process. So the only reason why we got to even entertain contingencies is because we had those well-defined and we trained on them. So the opportunity that I see with most of the businesses that I work with is they don't have their base plan defined. It's like there's no set way to answer the phone. There's no set way to send an invoice. There's no set way to like run a hiring process. It's just sort of like It's done by institutional knowledge, feel, and a gut check. So where I usually start is, we can talk about the contingencies, we can talk about the what ifs, but show me how you want it done first.
Yeah, no, I like it. I have a system I developed since 2004 called Hire the Best on how to hire people. Mm-hmm. And I find the same thing, you know, and then people are promoted into management and they're expected to know how to hire, how to assess people properly. And they don't have a clue. They really don't understand at all. It's like you said, it's a lot on gut feel. And I think you're doing a lot of stuff. So would you, it's fun to have somebody like you on the show, which I'm fortunate. I have great guests often. It's like, hey, Christian, come on over for dinner, man. Let's just talk. And it'd be fun, but you're on the opposite coast and, you know, maybe our paths will cross someday. But would you please tell the audience, you know, at Uncommon Elite, you're trying to do some things that are uncommon and elite. They're best in class. I'm not talking about elite rich people who are snobs in their opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. But elite, best in class. So, will you please let the audience know, you know, what you guys are doing and also, you know, how they can learn more about it?
Yeah. I mean, very high level, predominantly what we're doing is we're working with businesses that have a key leadership need. Anything from general manager all the way up to CEO. Business sizes are anywhere from $2 million a year revenue to we did one that was just about 200 million. And so businesses reach out to us because they have a leadership problem, and either they don't have the time to develop leaders, or the leaders that they have in place or managers don't have the cut to take the business to the next level. And so we go pull from special operations organizations, primarily individuals that have served in the SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, and then also have 3 to 5 years of post-military experience. So think of a Green Beret that's been running a $30 million a year HVAC business that now a private equity reaches out to us and they want to put them in a $100 million HVAC business. So that's primarily what we're doing. And the best way to reach us is through our website, commonelite.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so you can find us there. Yeah. And that's generally it.
Well, cool. I'll be candid with you in my audience. You know, it's very rare that I recommend a recruiter. Okay. Because I feel you need to be good in hiring yourself. What I would say is that when you can find someone like yourself, and there's also a company called VAR Staffing that works in the computer industry that I work with, where you guys really know the profile of the people you're finding, the type of people. And, you know, you still need to know how to hire internally, because you cannot outsource the decision 100%. You still need to know what you're doing to assess the person. But in those strategic hires where a mistake can cost you $250,000, $1 million or more, because it is a senior level position, and those numbers rack up pretty quickly when you make the wrong hire, you know, it can make really good sense. And so I really appreciate you coming on the show. I thank you for your service to our country. And, you know, I hope our paths cross again.
Same. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation.